You know, in a lot of faith traditions, there's this really powerful idea that true holiness is found in poverty. But what if that's only half the story? Today, we're going to explore a Christian perspective that challenges that very notion, asking if a lack of resources can actually hinder a spiritual mission.
So this brings us to a fundamental and, yeah, for some, a pretty uncomfortable question. Is poverty a sign of holiness? For centuries, the image of the pious, humble servant of God has been tied to rejecting material wealth. But what if that deeply ingrained belief is actually getting in the way of the mission itself? And this sets up what you could almost call a righteous dilemma. How do you balance that deep spiritual devotion with the intensely practical needs of a global mission? In his message, Apostle Arokpo Michael really gets into this tension. He's not dismissing sacrifice at all. He sees it as an honorable part of faith. But he poses a critical question. What happens when a lack of money, a lack of resources, becomes the very thing that stops the mission in its tracks?
This leads us to the core of his argument, a powerful case against what the speaker calls unnecessary poverty.
And he really doesn't mince words here. He's not talking about poverty that someone chooses for a specific divine purpose. No, he's making this passionate plea against the kind of poverty that isn't a calling, but is actually a hindrance. And here's the crucial distinction he makes. On one side, you have consecrated poverty. Think of Mother Teresa, right? A specific divine calling, an honorable sacrifice for a purpose. But on the other side, you've got unnecessary poverty, which he frames as just a roadblock, something that flat out limits your ability to get things done.
Okay, so if poverty isn't the goal, then what is the purpose of wealth from this viewpoint? Well, it's not about personal gain, that's for sure.
The goal is defined by this really powerful term, capacity for functionality. It's not about having wealth for its own sake. It's about having the resources you need to effectively do what you're called to do. Not for vanity, but for real, tangible impact.
And that functionality, it's aimed at two core goals. First, to advance the kingdom. Spreading the message, building churches, funding missions. And second, to help humanity, tackling real-world needs like hunger and suffering.
Now, to back this all up, the speaker uses examples from both the Bible and his own modern-day experiences, which really brings it to life. And the first example is a big one, Jesus himself. The argument is that while he lived a simple life, his ministry wasn't unfunded. The point is made that even God, in human form, needed resources to travel and carry out his work. In fact, if you look at the Gospel of Luke, it points to this directly. It names people like Joanna and Susanna, and then it says, and many others, who supported the ministry with their substance, in other words, with their own money. The second example is the Apostle Paul. His ministry involved a ton of practical logistics. A huge part of what he did was teach about giving, collect donations, and then make sure those funds actually got to the different churches so they could operate.
But it's a story from the speaker's own life that really drives the point home. He talks about a recent crusade he led in a place called Mongu and what he saw there. So by any spiritual measure, this event was a massive success. On the final night alone, more than 3,000 people came forward to convert. Just an incredible moment of revival.
But then, the next morning, a very different kind of reality hit. The speaker announced they had brought some rice for any widows who needed it, thinking maybe a small group would come.
So many widows came forward, it became, as he put it, a mini crusade in itself. And in that moment, he had this huge realization. These people had just experienced spiritual miracles, but now they had a pressing physical need. They were hungry. And as he says so bluntly, that problem couldn't be solved with prayer. It needed money. So all of this leads to the most important part of the whole message, finding the right balance. It's so critical to understand what this view is advocating for, and, just as importantly, what it isn't. To be crystal clear, the speaker insists this is not a prosperity gospel. It's not about making money the top priority or judging someone's faith by how wealthy they are. Instead, money is framed as something completely different. It's a tool for ministry, a way to establish the covenant, and a practical way to help people.
And the theological anchor for this whole argument comes from Deuteronomy. The scripture says that God gives the power to get wealth for a very specific reason, to establish his covenant here on earth. So it's presented as a tool with a divine purpose.
This quote really captures that balanced approach perfectly. The advice isn't to chase after money or make it your idol. It's simply not to shut your heart against it. Because, as he warns, without resources,
how many good, righteous visions will just go unfulfilled?
Which leaves us with this final, really challenging question. If we accept this idea that money is just a tool for a mission, then the whole focus shifts, doesn't it? It's no longer about whether wealth is good or bad. The only question that really matters is, how is that tool being used?